you might definitely feel that there is a lot of data which I mean which we are going through here, and we're separating motion as motion of p and of q, and then discussing the relative velocity concept as well. So yes, all of this will definitely make you feel a bit cloudy. Now, why am I still doing this? See, the primary aim here is to understand the process of visualization. One, two, to solve it mathematically, which is, of course, what we are trying to aim for, the JEE means. But then what we can't skip is the actual intent of the question. See, if there was a direct equation, an equation to be given you directly, instead of giving all this data and then asking to find the quadratic or the cubic roots of it, that becomes a class 9 question. I mean, a question that uh, can be asked for a class 9 annual examination. But then it's not the case here. See, that's what the whole beauty of this question is. It is asking you to solve a cubic a degree equation, or maybe a quadratic and a actually a quadratic equation, because one of the roots is already given as t is equal to 0. So asking a JEE main student to solve a quadratic equation doesn't make sense, right? So that's where the significance of the question comes in. It is actually asking you to visualize the data, or visualize the extract of the data, and then sort it out in your mind, derive the equations out of that sorting, and then solve it. And therefore, understanding what is given in the question, it is of utmost importance. See, now you might be wondering, the question is hardly 3 to 4 sentences. Then why should the understanding be so complex? Because the question explains to you what happens in the beginning and what happens at the end. The middle part is not explained in the question, which is what we're trying to do here, which is, of course, taking the most time out of it. Now, say, for example, you start preparing for JEE mains, and then you enter into an NIT, or later advanced and enter into an IIT. Wow, that looks good. That's very simple. But then how was the process? That you can't explain it in a simple words. I started preparing for my exam. T is equal to 0. I started. I took admission into IIT or NIT, or for that matter, any other college, and then okay, the end point and the starting point is given. How did you? What did you do between those two intervals? That's what the question is asking you to say here. That's what the question is demanding you to visualize here. That becomes really difficult, and therefore this much of time. And what I'll also like to assure you here is that after we discuss the relative displacement part and the integration of it, we will revisit this complete explanation one more time in simple terms, using more or less the same description that's given to us, but then we will try to break it down into proper time frames. And then at the end of this, I can assure you, you will be very confident, not just in this question, but in any other questions which are related to the same format, or maybe the coming JEE mains question, which will demand a similar visualization from you. But yes, it's going to take a really long time to understand how. Okay, right. Now let's see what happens in motion of car Q. Out of the given data, all we need to focus is that the car Q moves with a constant acceleration. Now, when we say that a car Q moves with a constant acceleration, the mathematical equivalent of this would be AQ is equal to 16 meter per second square. Now, you might have a question. How did we come to 16 meter per square? Again, I'm not solving this question for you here now. We're just trying to understand what is happening in the actual motion. This is not given in the question. I have taken this value. Well, of course, out of the blue, but not directly out of the blue, because I've done some calculations and I've found these values of constants to be more suitable. Okay. So AQ is 16 meter per second square. Velocity is the integral of acceleration. And when time t is equal to 0, we assume the velocity of q to be 8 meter per second. Yes, I do understand. Again, it's a bit of too much of calculations. We don't need this. All what we need from this calculation is exactly the velocity, the function, the velocity function, which is vq of t is 8 plus 16t. Now, if we integrate that further, velocity integrated will give you displacement. The calculation is not relevant. What is relevant instead is what? Instead is the displacement function of q with respect to time. And if we later plot this displacement function with assuming values from t is equal to 0 to 10 and the corresponding values of displacement, what we get is a parabolic curve here, right? Now, this is where things become interesting. We've started with acceleration of q, velocity of q, displacement of q, plotted the graph. We did the same for p as well. So we have the displacement of t here. Now, let me just bring both of them together. For the same time intervals, we have displacements of p, the corresponding displacement of p and of q. T is equal to 0, 0, 0. T is equal to 1, displacement of p is 21 meters, of q is 16 meters. Likewise, we have a set of values, right? Go through this. If possible, write it down and tell me, what do you observe here? Is there anything striking that comes to your mind now? What is that? Exactly, we see that at three different time intervals as t is equal to 0, t is equal to 2, and t is equal to 6, we have the corresponding displacements of p and q exactly the same, which is what is asked in the question here about the number of crossings that is taking place. And what's the number of crossings here? 1, 2, and 3. One of them has already been given in the question because the question says both cars crossed each other at the time t is equal to 0 for the first time. So this is for the first time, the second time, and the third time. So the answer to this question is 3. Okay. Now, after watching all this, right, after going through the solution so far, I would suggest that you keep, oh, my bad, you keep watching this one more time. Go back to the solution, beginning of the solution. Watch this movement of these two cars one more time, and then try to teach, or maybe try to talk yourself, try to teach yourself the explanation, keeping the notes that I've written so far. This is what happens in t is equal to 0. This is what happens in t is equal to 2. T is equal to c. How did we arrive at the equation of displacement? How did we arrive at the velocity equation? And then analyze that further. Okay. So if you have spent sufficient time to understand the question here, so far you have reached a point where you can actually say that the answer is 3, and you know what it means physically from the given data, right? Now what we'll do is we'll try to go through the same question, but not assuming general values like we did here, a is equal to 16 and the values of k and a0 b0. We'll do this purely using the concept of maths, specifically integration and quadratic equations, and most importantly the value of discriminant, something very crucial. So yes, I think the class level JE means quadratic equations. If you are really thorough with the basics of it, I'm not talking about the kind of questions that come for JE means maths. I'm trying to ask, demanding the basic concepts of quadratic equations with the nature of roots and the value of d specifically. If we can just revisit that, we can go through the solution one more time, and then you'll realize, oh, this is what the question was actually about. And after doing that, I will take you through the complete picture, the complete events of this motion that's happening, and then things will make the best sense to you. Okay. So now let's look at the way to do this mathematically.